We are back on the Spin Room. Thanks for staying with us. It's the Trump economy, stupid. The greatest threat to the president's 2020 re-election campaign may not actually be the pile of investigations hovering over the Oval Office, but what could very well be his Achilles heel, the economy. Experts warn a recession may be in the cards for 2019. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates for the fourth time this year, and the president is not happy about it. Joining me from Miami is founder of Genesis 10, recently named by USA Today as the 29th best CEO in the U.S., Harley Lipman, and in New York, business developer and entrepreneur, Tom Maoli. Guys, it is great to see you. Thanks for coming on the show. Harley, I want to start with you. The president has often bet his presidency on the economy and record-breaking market numbers, but when it tumbles, as we've seen, shouldn't the president take the blame too?
Well, of course, but what's going to happen is if it tumbles, he may not even run for re-election. Because if you look historically, the impact of the economy has a huge bearing on the ability of a president to be re-elected. Look at Jimmy Carter. He lost when he ran for re-election because the economy was really bad, double-digit inflation. Same thing with George Walker Bush. He lost in 1992 and he was going into the election with record numbers of approval, but we went into a recession. He's blamed for it. The problem is when it comes to being a president, they get too much credit for the market success and they get too much blame when it goes down. But that's how it goes.
Yeah, I want to talk about the blame game that you just mentioned, Tom. I want to get your response to this, the credit issue and the blame game, because Trump, he made tariffs an integral part of his America First agenda, slapping tariffs on 31 countries, affecting more than $12 billion in imports. Does it look like the collateral damage from the trade wars and the tariffs are now coming back to haunt him?
Well, I think it's multifaceted. You have a trade war issue. I definitely think they're coming back to haunt him a little bit. I definitely think they're going to hurt him in the election. You have a Fed raising interest rates. You have an economy that was on fire, and they're trying to slow it down because they don't want inflation. And we also have what nobody's talking about is, he's shut down the borders. We have a labor problem. Cost of labor is rising because the labor pool in the United States has dried up because the borders are shut down. Nobody wants to do these manual jobs anymore, and the cost of them is astronomical. And now you're talking about putting an infrastructure bill in place, which is going to have roads, bridges, and infrastructure rebuilt. I don't know who's going to do all this work.
Harley, your response to that are the trade wars and the tariffs? Are they also? Do you think they're coming back to haunt him?
Absolutely. And when you mention the Fed, when the Federal Reserve is independent for a reason, and when you politicize the Fed, you undermine market confidence. So that's going to hurt him as well. As far as a trade war, no one wins in a trade war. And we're about to see something quite interesting. Trump is really making a huge gamble on this. He's literally lecturing the Chinese that if they don't have a deal by March 1, he's going to increase tariffs. He's even mentioned everything to about 25% or more. Right now, it hovers around 10%, and it's only a fraction of the Chinese goods that are taxed. But if he does it, obviously the Chinese will retaliate, and it'll be extremely bad for everyone.
Tom, the markets, they took another tumble with the Fed defying the president and hiking the interest rate. Past presidents have criticized the Fed, but never did, they never did it so publicly like Trump did on a specific rate decision before it was even announced. He criticized Bernanke for keeping the rates low, saying they were propping up Obama's economy. But now that he's president, he wants Powell to do the exact same thing. What do you make of this feud between the two?
Well, listen, I think he's looking for an out as to why the stock market is unraveling. I think the stock market is unraveling because of the Fed, but it's the Fed's doing the right thing. They have to stop inflation. You can't continue to have inflation run wild in this country because interest rates and inflation affect everyone. They affect the consumer, and if the consumer gets crushed, everyone gets crushed.
Would you agree with that the Fed is doing the right thing, Harley?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it historically, the number's been about 5%. So all it went up was a quarter of 1%, 25 basis points to 2.5. So it's still well below the historical average. The problem is, though, is that if Trump doesn't make an agreement with China, who may need an agreement more than the United States, given their economy is slowing, I believe the stock market will crash.
But Harley, just staying, with the issue of the style and how the president reacts, I mean, is it appropriate for the president to be so explicitly critical of the Fed the way Trump is?
Well, a lot of presidents criticize the Fed, almost all. I mean, Reagan did it as well. Trump, being consistent with his style, is going further than most presidents have. But what's really startling when you look at all the numbers recently about the midterm elections, for example, going into the midterm elections, he had GDP growth of 3.5%. During the Obama years, it was only about 2%. There was a booming stock market, and inflation is low. So he had everything going in his way. And we all know people vote their pocketbooks. That's the biggest factor and determines who's going to win elections or re-elections. And yet, even with, and record low employment, a 50-year low at 3.7%. And yet, with all that, he still lost 40 seats in the House. So if you look at that as somewhat of an indicator of the future, he's going to have a lot of trouble going forward in the next election.
All right, Tom, I want to talk about the recession and show you a poll that was done this week by Duke University that says nearly half, 48.6% of U.S. CFOs believe that the U.S. will be in recession by the end of 2019, and 82% believe that a recession will have begun by the end of 2020. And if indeed the economy is going to lose steam by 2020, maybe even as early as 2019, you have to agree with me, Trump's no longer going to be able to sell one of his biggest midterm, at least, campaign talking points. And if he can't boast about the economy anymore, especially in the Rust Belt, what sort of position does this put him in politically, Tom?
Well, it's interesting because I think that he has a lot of headwinds in front of him. I'm a big Trump supporter. I love what he did, some of the things he's done for the country. I voted for him. I was on his side. But I think he has a lot of headwinds. I think the economy, like we said before, people bet and they vote with their pocketbooks. And at the end of the day, that's going to be the big headwind. I think that, you have an economy that's going to slow down. I would agree with the recession, hands down. I think it's coming. It's clear where the Fed is going. They're talking about more interest rates in the future. That's going to slow the economy down more. I think we have a major slowdown, and I think everyone's right. I think China is the big issue, and I think he's got to back off China. The goods and services that are traded between us and China the numbers are staggering, and I don't think that anybody understands the damage that will be done if he continues to put these tariffs on China.
Harley, would you agree that we're headed towards a recession?
Yeah, I do think so. The stock market is very much focused on developments in the future, and they're very concerned with Trump's approach, it being extremely risky. So if he could pull off an agreement, he is going to be a hero, and it will help everybody. If he could pull off an agreement with China, the economy is going to improve not only in the United States but around the world. If he doesn't pull off an agreement and he follows through on his threat, and he increases tariffs, and there's a trade war, and of course China will retaliate and do the same.
Do you think he's capable of listening to your advice, Harley?
Well, we'll see. He has a lot of smart people around him, but you never know. As we learned today, I think he's he surprised everyone with what he did by pulling the U.S. troops out of Korea, so you never know.
Yeah, Tom, it looks like you wanted to say something. Tom, go ahead.
And I would agree. Yeah, I do. I think you have to look at the real estate market too. I'm a real estate developer. I buy and sell real estate and develop, and I think that it's overheated. I mean, there's buildings in Manhattan. There's cranes everywhere. You go up and down Miami. There's cranes everywhere. And I have to tell you, these buildings they're not selling out. They're not being filled. And I think it's going to come down and crash. A lot of these buildings are being built by private equity groups and who have a 5-year return cycle, and that cycle is going to come quick. And somehow they're going to have to get out and get their cash out to pay back their investors, and it's going to be by dropping prices and rental rates. And I think there's going to be a real estate crash coming.
Oh, real estate crash as well. Okay, that's all the time we have, guys. Tom and Harley, thank you so much for your insight on this issue. Appreciate you coming on the Spin Room today. Thanks a lot. And when we come back, why did U.S. President Donald Trump decide to pull troops out of Syria so abruptly? And what does it mean for the region? Here, the